Alongside EQ, compression is probably the most common type of processor employed by producers and mix engineers when recording and mixing records. The full name for this process is actually dynamic range compression, and if you're completely new to this type of processor, that's a helpful term, as it immediately tells you that the job of a compressor is to narrow or deliberately restrict the dynamic range of the signals it's processing. A useful first question to ask might be, why would anyone want to do that? If you're working with a skilled vocalist, for example, who is in the process of recording a heartfelt, rich performance, which varies in dynamic range from a gentle whisper to an emotive, strident tone, why would we want to dampen that range by deliberately restricting it? To understand this, it's helpful to think in terms of the way in which we hear sounds around us and how we associate quality with certain volume levels. We use words like strong, warm, solid, and confident when we're describing certain sounds within a mix. And these adjectives are often perfect when it comes to describing signals which have been compressed. It turns out that our ears are impressed most by signals which have a solid average level, rather than one which is occasionally stronger than that average, but also frequently below that average. The latter, in particular, sounds weak, which is rarely a quality we want in our recordings. It also turns out that compressors do more than merely control average level. Depending on the components within a compressor and the settings you use when passing signals through them, it's often the case that they will shape the colour and warmth of a sound. To be clear, compressors don't set out to be EQs or harmonic saturators or distortion units, and yet, at certain settings, they can bring some of these qualities to the signals they process, adding power and a stronger sonic footprint along the way. No wonder that most producers will reach for compressors for both individual sounds and groups of sounds within a mix. Through recorded history, various approaches to compression have been introduced, become popular, and then taken hold, with many designs originally introduced decades ago still proving popular. Tube-based compressors, such as the iconic Teletronics LA2A, offer a warm, natural response to dynamics control, allowing you to contour the shape of a sound via two main controls, peak reduction and gain. These control the tube-driven electro-optical design, bringing immediately musical results. Other tube-based designs remain highly desirable, including the Fairchild 660 and 670, which are particularly popular as bus compressors, either across the output 2 bus or for processing drum multitrack sessions. However, the desire for true peak dynamics control remained a passion for compressor designers, a compressor which was fast enough to allow you to squash even the initial transient of a sound, with variable attack time to let you decide exactly which stage of a transient peak to compress remained the holy grail. And arguably the search was ended with Bill Putnam's design for the 1176 classic limiting amplifier. Unlike the tube-based designs of the decade before, the 1176, released in 1968, relied on a solid-state transistor-based design, which explains its rapid response time. But very few compressors have stood the test of time by means of their dynamics range control alone. What the 1176 introduced was the capacity for tonal aggression, bite, harmonics extension, and even, at extreme settings, a saturation of the signal are possible within the 1176, which explains why it remains as popular for rock enthusiasts as it does for hip-hop and 808 kick drum devotees. But it's that sense of tonal coloration, or deliberate lack of it, which can also set some compressor designs aside. The solid-state VCA-based design of the G-Bus compressor at the heart of SSL's 4000 series console is famed for its capacity to glue a mix together, with the potential for a fast attack time, but, despite that, an almost transparent tonal colour which just makes everything sound punchier, clearer and more open. And on the subject of warm, open, less aggressive sounding compressors, opto designs like TubeTech's CL1B can be a slower responding and yet musical and transparent choice. Opto designs feature a dynamics range reduction circuit which relies on a light and a light detector, where the detector works harder, and thereby varies the amount of gain, as the light grows brighter or dimmer. In other words, the brighter the light glows, the more the compressor attenuates the level to compress it. Regardless of which compressor type you choose, you'll tend to find the same core parameters available to configure settings to your taste. These are threshold. The threshold point sets the volume level above which compression will occur. Low thresholds mean that more signal will be compressed, whereas high thresholds will ensure that only the loudest parts of the signal breach the threshold point and are compressed. Ratio. Ratio determines how much louder a signal can get once it has passed through the threshold point. A ratio of 2 to 1 means that a signal which would have become 2 dB louder can now only increase in volume by 1 dB. A 4 to 1 ratio means that signals would have had to become 4 dB louder, only now to rise by 1 dB. The higher the ratio, the harder the compressor is working to attenuate or cut volume. A ratio of infinity to 1, where a signal cannot get any louder than the threshold point, is referred to as limiting. In truth, once signals get past a ratio of about 12 to 1, our ear will determine that they've reached the point of limiting, as a signal is having to work so much harder to get any louder. Gain. The gain or makeup dial allows you to boost levels to make up for levels lost during the compression process. Remember, by setting a threshold point and then a ratio, you will be attenuating or cutting volume, as the loudest parts of your signal will be reduced. This output gain stage is important to bring louder signals back up in level. And in doing so, you'll raise the average volume of a sound, as its new dynamic range will be louder than its uncompressed equivalent. Attack and release. These controls set the speed at which compression will occur. As signals get louder and pass through the threshold point, the attack time controls how quickly those signals will be attenuated. As signals reduce in volume and pass back through the threshold point as they get quieter, the release time controls how quickly they recover to their uncompressed state. In quick-acting compressors like FET and VCA models, fast attack times let you target the peak of transient-rich signals, like drums, to squash a signal hard. Slower attack times leave peaks alone and compress the decay stage of signals instead. Knee. The knee control has the potential to smooth the behaviour of signals in and around the threshold point. If you want a signal to remain completely uncompressed below the threshold point, and then to rapidly conform to the ratio setting above the threshold, choose a hard knee. If you want a smoother response, by asking the compressor to begin to submit to the threshold and ratio combination as signals approach the threshold point, choose a soft knee setting instead. Soft knee often produces smoother results, but you must decide if that's appropriate for the source material you're compressing. Read around about compression and you'll find no end of advice about the right way to use this effect. Certain processors appear to have a reputation for having a go-to quality where any other compressor choice would be inferior. Try very hard not to conform to this way of thinking, as the history of record production is littered with bold producers making their own choices about which compressor to use and creating a signature sound in the process. One great example of this would be Daft Punk's devotion to the Alesis 3630 compressor on the Homework and Discovery albums. One of the best-selling electronic dance music acts in the world relied on a completely unheralded $300 hardware compressor, and in doing so they made a sound all of their own. It definitely helps to understand the behaviour and tone-shaping capabilities of different compression types, but as compressors can create anything from transparent, barely there treatments, all the way through to near-distorted, hard-limited brick wall mayhem, it's no surprise that producers new to their journey into compression seek advice and hope to find the right way. Well, the exciting news is that there really is a right way, and that you're free to experiment until you find a compression solution which you like the sound of. Wherever possible, line up multiple compressors on a sound and audition one at a time, comparing the effect they have on a source signal. Listen to each one in turn, close your eyes, and dial into the qualities that each compressor offers. How does it behave as it starts to work harder? Is there an obvious tonal difference between each compressor type? How does a compressor respond to rapid changes in level? Does it feel as though it's providing more energy or less? Most of all, try to avoid using compressors simply to turn everything up in level. Many plug-in compressors feature automatic makeup gain compensation, which means that even before you've set a threshold and ratio, signals automatically sound louder. As the human ear likes volume, it's tempting to immediately think that this loudness boost equates to better quality. It's actually much better to switch automatic gain off, set threshold and ratio manually, listen carefully, and then boost levels by the amount of your choice to really hear the difference a compressor can make. Take your time, keep listening, and comparing the uncompressed sound with the compressed version that you've made. And when you find something which is improving the sound of the track you're working on, trust your instinct and go with it.